preacher for a number of years, so he's certainly experienced in all aspects of grieving. And he's put together these 5 sessions, and I think you will be blessed by putting forth the time coming and being a part of that. So we don't have a clock on the wall, so we're in trouble. When you have a preacher and no clock on the wall, you're in trouble. But we're gonna let him take over and present his material for us, and thank you for coming.
Yes.
There's 2 sessions tonight. There'll be an intermission between the first and the second. There's some refreshments. Give you a chance to visit with him personally, one-on-one, get your questions answered. We're here to try to serve you and ease some of your pain that you're going through or have gone through over the last several months or years. So Larry, we're going to let you take it over, sir.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Larry.
This is Larry, my brother Larry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. How's everybody doing tonight?
Great.
Well, I'm a little bit frustrated. I had a plumbing problem today. And I was a little bit gratified because if I try to fix a plumbing problem, that's always 3 trips to the hardware store. Well, I had a plumber today, and guess what? He made 3 trips to the hardware store to fix my plumbing. So I'm somewhat gratified by that. And maybe I'm not such a bad plumber after all, but I do not like to plumb. Yes, my name's Larry Tittle, and I want to prepare you for what we're going to do, okay? I don't plan on preaching to you, okay, for 2 nights and Sunday morning about grief. What I plan on doing is interacting with you about grief, maybe your grief, maybe my grief. I'm in a grief journey too. I've suffered a loss, and we'll get into that later. And I think that's the best way to learn. I'm very happy with moving it in here. Very happy. Because this is a little more intimate, less formal, and I hope you'll feel free to speak and talk and maybe react or act to anything I say or what anybody else may say about grief. As he mentioned, I have served as both a hospital and a hospice chaplain for quite some time. And I've been in the room when somebody's loved one died. I've also got kicked out of a hospital room when somebody's loved one died. And you know what? They were both grieving. 2 different reactions, but they were both grieving. I've been in people's homes when someone died. And if I can speak personally, I lost my dad when I was 10 to Lou Gehrig disease. My mother died 6 months before my wife and I got married. And so I had a stand-in mom in our wedding. It was my mother's best friend. About 6 years ago, my brother, an older brother, my only brother, was found dead on his kitchen floor. Either a heart attack or a stroke. So I've had plenty of opportunities to grieve. I'll share with you that I don't know if I did it right in some of those, and we'll talk about that. But as Larry mentions, there's other reasons that you might grieve. I lost my girlfriend, a senior in high school. Oh, there you go. That's a loss. So we're gonna kind of talk like that. The first session tonight is on the right to grieve, and we'll get into that. And if you didn't get a handout, they're up here. And if you want one, you can come up and get it. Or
Can we pass those out?
you can pass them out, yeah. Which means you're gonna have to have something to write with. You have to have something to write with, because there's
Oh, I
blanks.
don't think that's something to write
There's
with.
blanks. See?
Oh,
I know,
yeah.
there's all kinds of things
Yeah.
in there. Yeah. Somebody was thinking ahead. You want to pass these out?
Just pass it around.
There you go.
I got it.
Yes, I'll just pass it. There we go.
What's the date and all the Blair.
Thanks, man.
Good to see you, Miss Betty.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I've got
And prepare.
Yeah, we passed it all the way over, so Betty.
Okay.
There you go, you got it.
Thank you.
Thank y'all very much for doing that.
Everybody should have one.
Come on in.
Thank you.
Oh, you're okay, you're okay.
You can sit here. Carl is sitting there.
Oh, you can sit on the front row.
Yeah, that's fine. So I can go
She
on.
would have given that.
At some points tonight, I'm just gonna sit down right here,
That sounds good.
and we're gonna talk.
That sounds good.
We're just gonna talk. And we're gonna share, and we're gonna, we may even cry. And if we do, that's okay. We can cry. We'll be talking about the right to grieve tonight, and we'll explain why it's mentioned that way. After our break, the second session will have to do with the emotion of grief. And we'll talk about how we feel. How we feel. You know what? Different people grieving feel different things. And I'm not sure there's one right way. The first session tomorrow night has to do with helping those who are grieving. So in this room tonight, you're one of two categories, and you could be a crossbreed. Okay, you're either grieving, you're on a grief journey yourself, or perhaps you want to be a helper. You want to stand alongside people who are grieving, or you might be both. And so we're going to be talking about what's the right way to do that. What's the right way to stand beside somebody that's grieving? And then the last session tomorrow night is maybe the one you're working on. How do you live through grief? Living a life through grief. And so that's the direction we're going. Now, Sunday morning, I'll not be preaching. Like I said, I'm not going to preach. That Larry will be preaching. But I'll have Bible class. And I'm going to bring resources that might prove helpful to it, but I would really like to answer questions. So here's a bunch of blank pieces of paper. Right there. And if over the course of tonight and tomorrow night, if you have a question, go ahead and write it down, and we'll try to address it on Sunday morning. I have some other things I want to share with you, but answering questions is what's important. And I'll be happy to take a stab at those. So that's kind of the direction we're going. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time kind of introducing it, but I think it was important. But the thing I do want to say is I'm not scheduled like this. In other words, if it's time to take a break tonight and we haven't finished session one, well, after the break, we'll keep going, session one. So this is not that rigid. If during the course of our time and our discussion, if we get off on a tangent, that's fine too, just so it somehow is tied to our grief and our grief journeys. Because I think that's what we need to do here tonight. I really wish that tomorrow was an all-day session. And that there would be some things that we would try to experience together. But in tomorrow night's session, I'll share with you what some of those experiences are and how you can do those. Especially, well, on both cases, whether you're trying to support someone who's grieving or whether you yourself are in grief. I don't know why you're grieving. Okay, I don't know you that well. Well, I think I know some of yours. Didn't you share that with me the other day when I was here? I've kind of forgotten some of them, but I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll feel comfortable enough tonight to talk about why you're in the pit of grief, and maybe we can all help. So that's kind of where we're going, and if we can be pretty informal, that's the way I'm going to like it. And I think maybe you will too. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, sometimes our hearts are just broken, Father, and maybe grief that sometimes we hold deep down inside of us just rises to the surface and comes out. And maybe even in those times we don't even know how to express it. And maybe our closest friends don't even know how to help us. So I'm just praying that you take control of this weekend, and that you keep us within the thoughts of your word and your will, in various aspects, Father, that we can find the hope that we know we have through you and your Son, and that we can find tools, find strength, find ability to be able to support and walk beside those who are grieving. And for those that are here tonight that find themselves in that pit, Father, I'm praying for a special, just powerful measure of your grace and your peace and your love. And that they'll know that you care. You know what's going on in their lives. You know what they're dealing with. And you love them, and you haven't deserted them, but you're right there with them in this journey that they're having to go through. So bless us tonight. Bless me as I present, Father, and that we'll all spiritually benefit from having been here this weekend. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So tonight is the right to grieve, but I want to share with you first what our target is. It was already on, I turned it off. Okay. There. The target is living forward with hope. Living forward with hope. Some of us find ourselves stalemated in the pit of grief, and we're not living forward. And we want to get out of that. And so the graphic that you see before that somewhat indicates light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe some of us find ourselves in the tunnel. I'll be honest with you, I'm in the tunnel. Okay? But I can see the light. I know it's there. And my wife and I both are finding the ability and the strength to live forward. And when we get to the grieving session, which is the last one tomorrow night, we'll talk more about this. But wherever you are, this exists. Okay, there is hope, and there is light at the end of that tunnel. We'll talk tomorrow night about some other things. But what you also need to realize is the tunnel will always be there. It will always be there. But so will the light. And that's what we're looking for. And that's what's called living forward with hope. So tonight, you have the right to grieve. Don't let anybody take that right away from you. You have the right to grieve. You know, we live in a society where it seems like some of our rights are being taken away, or at least they're trying, to take away some of our rights. But this one, no one can take away from you. Some may try, and we'll kind of talk about that at the end of tonight's session 1 lesson about that. But it is your right. As a matter of fact, God made you that way. God made you to grieve. And we'll mention that again tomorrow. But here's that famous Ecclesiastes chapter 3 passage. And verse 4 says, there's a time to weep, there's a time to laugh, there's a time to mourn, and there's a time to dance. It would also say there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. We'll talk about that tomorrow night. It also says that there's a time to talk and there's a time not to talk. We'll talk about that tomorrow night as we talk about those who are trying to stand beside those who are grieving. But here's what the Koheleth said, the preacher, that there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. If your life hasn't included both, okay, then definitely something's missing. And it may be God. Because you have time, there's time to do both. We're going to concentrate on that time to mourn and that time to weep over the next couple of nights, and how we can move to the dancing. I'm not a dancer, but the dancing and the laughing. So that's what the preacher says, and he's right. So we start here. We're starting with the definition, you might say, of grief. Grief is the natural and normal reaction to loss of any kind. What's our two operative words there? Natural and normal. So, if someone experiences a loss in their life and they're not grieving, that's not natural. And it's not normal. I said a while ago, and I believe this to be a fact, as God put us together, He formed us to grieve when we lose, when we have a loss. He is the God that created nature. And we're part of that. And it is both natural and a normal reaction to a loss of any kind. Now, Larry alluded to this a while ago, and I want to do it again, which means I'm going to get out of order. Okay, at the end of your handout, you have a space there to write down other forms, other events that can bring about grief. In other words, other losses. Okay, and I'm not going to give you time to write those down, and I'm not going to list them for you. I'm going to let you list them for me. In just a minute, I'm going to say go. Okay? And I want 7 other losses that people can experience that will result in grief. I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. Then I just want you to blurt them out, and you don't need to try to write them down as they're saying them, and you can write them down tonight when you go home. But what are some other losses that can be experienced that will bring about grief? Ready, set, go.
Fire.
Fire.
Divorce.
Illnesses.
Illnesses.
Illness.
Someone said
Divorce.
divorce. Okay, you got 4 more to go.
Pets. Pets.
Pets.
Pets.
Okay.
Losing your home.
Losing your home. Okay.
Empty nest.
Empty nest.
That'd be one.
Hmm?
That was mine.
What's the 6th one?
That's 6. We need 1 more.
Job loss.
Thank you. That's my grief right now. Okay. It's the loss of a job. And I was the preacher at Northridge, and I got terminated January 27th this year. And so those are losses. I think I'm grieving. I think my wife's grieving.
Oh, being laid off is a loss.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. There's, I guess, 1 of 2 ways that you lose a job. You get fired, or your business goes away. Either way, you
Business loss, right.
get laid off. So that's right. What about a church split?
Oh, that
Is
would
that a
be-
loss?
Oh.
Yeah.
You bet.
Oh.
You bet that is. So don't have one. Okay? It is a loss.
Yes.
And somebody I mentioned other kinds of losses. Did anyone mention loss of a friend?
No, but that is a
That's
sad
a tough
thing.
one. One of my best friends is sitting back there on that back wall. If I lost him, it would send me into a grief spiral. And so I'm grieving over some losses you mentioned. You're grieving over some. Most of you may be here grieving over the loss of a loved one, or several. And you need to, if you need to tell us about that, because I don't know, then feel free to speak up and say, this is the loss I'm dealing with. And that may lead to you having a question that maybe we don't cover during these 2 sessions. But grief is the natural and normal reaction to loss of any kind. When did God grieve? It appears that he did, but there is one place where Noah. Remember in Genesis chapter 6, and the first several verses describe the conditions on the earth, you know. And then it says that God regretted making man, and it grieved him in his heart. You see, God didn't make man to do what they were doing. That was exactly opposite. And so God experienced the loss, and it grieved him at his heart. So if God's going to grieve at a loss, there's no problem with us grieving at our losses, whatever they may be. Here, grief is the conflict caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Okay? That's a lot of words. Okay? Grief is the conflict caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Most of us get pretty comfortable with our lives, don't we? Probably do mostly the same thing every day. Get up and do the same thing. And what happens if you get out of that pattern? Sometimes I think, hey, it's great. Others may feel totally lost. What do I do next? And so that happens. I was used to going to the office every day. My week was fairly structured. Every now and then Dick would come in and interrupt me. But Monday morning was working on Sunday night's sermon, the next Sunday night. And why would I do that?
Prepared. Get prepared.
Well, true. Most of my preacher buddies, present company excluded, because I don't know about you, detest the Sunday night sermon. They put all of their energy into Sunday morning, and they just detest the Sunday night sermon. I wasn't going to let that happen, so I was going to do the Sunday night sermon first, and then work on Sunday morning. So that's kind of, you know, my week was rather structured, and then you visit the hospital, and you visit people, and you counsel and things like that, and all of a sudden that quit. Very unexpectedly, that quit. And I entered that tunnel called grief. And that's what happens, whether it's loss of a job or anything else. And it's the conflict that comes there. Let me talk just a little bit about that, and we're going to get into it later in the second session. I don't know if it would surprise you or not, but one thing I experienced in my grief was anger. I was angry. But it was complicated by the fact that I was angry about getting angry. I thought, you can't get angry. Well, I was. And I was angry because I was angry. And I had to be straightened out about that. It was okay for me to be angry. It was okay. But I was creating my own conflict. And so conflicts arise when what we're familiar with changes, and that's what grief is. The conflict may simply be the question, what do I do next? Where do I go next? Who's going to be my best friend now? Those kinds of things. Grief. I better watch the clock here. I don't know. I better watch the clock. Okay. So let's talk here. Because you have the right to grieve, and because it's natural for you to, then what do you do with it? And these are going to kind of be generic things, and we'll be more specific at the second session tomorrow night. But you have the right to give voice to your grief. And that voice may come across in different ways. It may be saying to somebody, leave me alone. can't you see that I hurt? Or I don't want to talk to you right now. But you can give voice to your grief, and it's okay to do that. As a matter of fact, it's very, does that mean time's up?
I don't know.
Okay.
Your phone?
Maybe it's mine. You can, it's very therapeutic to give voice to your grief, because if you're not expressing how you feel, that means you're holding it in. They call that, and you can write this down, stuffing your grief. You're stuffing it. And that's very dangerous. Because what happens if you hold something down long enough? It explodes. It explodes. And we're going to talk about the expression of your grief tomorrow night, but that expression can happen in different ways. So give voice to your grief. If I can speak to the husband and wife relationship, okay? I don't know how many husbands and wives we have in the room tonight. You ever tell him how you feel?
Sometimes.
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 And when you say it, does he get it?
Not always.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, let's ask the other way around. You ever tell her how you feel?
No,
Why not?
I'm a guy.
That's right.
I stuff it.
You're right. You're a guy. That's the way we are, and that's horrible. Okay, we need to figure that out. Give voice to your grief. And maybe that means picking up the phone call and just calling your best friend and say, hey, this is what I'm doing today. This is how I feel today. And let them hear that. Don't stuff it. Tonight, as I said several times already, and tomorrow night, I hope you tell us how you're feeling and what your grief is doing to you. And you know what? We could come back a week from now and you would have a different story probably, because that's the process of grief. So give voice to your grief, and you have permission to ask questions. You have permission to ask questions. We're going to get kind of deep here in a minute, I guess. But we need to be honest. Okay, we need to really be honest with these questions, and if we're feeling them, we need to ask them. If you feel like asking, well, where was God in this? That's okay. It really is. God, where were you when this happened? For me personally, I believed that God moved us to Mount Pleasant, Texas. Someday I may tell you that story about why I believe that. But now we're moving from Mount Pleasant, Texas. If the house ever closes, it's been delayed 3 times. Okay? So now I'm thinking, okay, God, what was all this about? And I don't know the answer to that right now, but I will. I will someday. So it's okay to ask. It's okay to, if you have questions, to ask those questions too, and you have permission to do so. And nobody else has the right to say, well, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be asking that question. Nobody has the right to say that. That question is coming from your heart, and you may or may not really want an answer. You know, but it's there. And the questions may have to do with finances. They may have to do with, what am I going to do with the house if you're there living alone now? It may have to do with other relationships. But it's okay. It's okay to ask questions, even if they can't be answered. And likely they can't. But it's getting your grief it's keeping your grief from being stuffed. And you're getting it out, and you have permission to do that. You have permission to feel what you feel. And boy, we'll talk about that later on in our second session. But you have permission to feel what you feel. And there are tons of emotions that are associated with grief. Now, since we have a husband and wife back there, if you tell him how you feel, what's one thing you don't want him to say? You shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that, does he? Don't answer that, don't
He
answer
had it a
that.
long time, I don't think.
He did once.
It's said a lot to those who are in grief. When they express how they feel, somebody will say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And you tell somebody they shouldn't feel the way they feel. We've got to talk about that some more. So you have permission to feel what you feel. Don't confuse the word feel with do. You may not have permission to do what you do, but you have permission to feel what you feel. Okay? We'll kind of massage that later on. You are not broken. If you're grieving, you are not broken, so you do not need to be fixed. Only broken things need to get fixed. It cost me 3 hours and $234 today to fix my broken pipe. Okay? You fix what's broken. You, because you are in grief, are not broken. Yes, your life may be impacted, it may be changed a bit, but it's your heart that's broken. Your life is not. You don't need to be fixed. Maybe some healing needs to take place. And what do we say is the best healer? Time. Time is the best. You may need some time, but you're not broken. You know, I think maybe within churches at times, we've come down rather heavy on people who are in grief, and especially if they have maybe been, in our opinion, in an extended time of grief. Fairly recently at Northridge, we had a member who, before I moved there, had lost their son. He was grown, but he was their son. And I began to notice that every week she went to the grave. Every week. And she brought flowers or things like that to put on the grave, and she would then take a picture of it and put it on Facebook and whatever her thoughts were about her son. And I began to wonder, is that a good, healthy process in grieving, to do that every week? I wasn't saying it was or wasn't, I just didn't know. And so I called a professional grief counselor, a dear friend of mine, Beverly Ross. I'm going to tell you their story. I was going to tell you in the first session, maybe in the second session, about their story, but I asked her, I told her what was going on. I said, would this be okay, or is it the indication that maybe the grief journey is not happening? And so she asked me some other questions about this person, which I answered, and she said, no, this is fine. That is a part of this person's dealing with their grief, and it's fine. And so that helped me see some things, maybe from a little different perspective. You feel what you feel, you're not broken, you don't need to be fixed. If you go into your bedroom and close your door and don't want to talk to anybody, you're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. If all of a sudden you find yourself talking on the telephone all day long, you're not broken, you don't need to be fixed. You're in grief. It's the normal, natural reaction to a loss of any kind. Okay. Grief is about a broken heart not a broken brain, preachers accepted, and perhaps not about a broken faith. Because that's something that sometimes is said to people, especially Christians, who are in grief. Well, where's your faith? Or don't you have faith? Or your faith will take care of this. To a great degree, or to some degree, your faith will. Your faith will come through. But that's not what needs to be said to people in grief. And sometimes, depending on what the loss is, sometimes the faith can be tested. But what does the Bible say when your faith is tested? That it's strengthened. That it's strengthened. So we're not talking about anything being broken for a person who's in grief. We're talking about a broken heart. And so this person does not need to be fixed. So let me say quickly, that doesn't mean that maybe professional help wouldn't be appropriate. We'll talk about that Sunday morning. But that person is not broken. Remember Job? Job chapter 1 is where all this happens, or in the early part of Job, and Satan comes to God, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? He says, there's nobody like him. And Satan says, well, you put a hedge around him, and you just let me have him, and he'll turn against you. So God says, well, okay, you can do whatever you want to, but don't do anything to Job. It happens a second time, right? And this time he says, well, you can do anything to Job, but don't kill him. And it gets so bad, and you know the story of everything that he lost, everybody that he lost, to the point that his wife said, why don't you just curse God and die? And then those friends show up. And all of that was Satan's doing. Don't let Satan massage your grief. So you have a healthy respect for Satan and his power and what he's able to do. But don't let Satan massage or take advantage of you in your grief. And that sometimes is a very difficult thing to do. Difficult thing. You want to come on in? We have at least one chair left. Sit there by Dick, he needs some company.
Yeah, we're outnumbered.
Okay, be careful about hitting the camera. I love being up like it is. Just have a healthy respect in your heart for Satan, with what he will be trying to do with you in your grief, obviously, to turn you away from God. Okay? So be careful there. All right, we've already talked about other grief-producing events. And so we're not gonna go to that. I got that kind of out of order. The thing I want to kind of share with you is that last point on your handout, and then we're going to show a little video here. You don't and can't muscle your way through grief. You can't pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and say, I'm going to do this. I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to let the grief run its course as you learn to live with it. And that's important, but this is the society we live in. You just grit your teeth and get up and do it. And maybe that works in some other realm out there with your job or whatever, but not when you're going through grief. But I have a little video here that will close this session with, almost on time. The client really, it's not, well, it could be a grief thing, but y'all remember Bob Newhart? This does have audio, right?
I think so.
Or that has audio. Something better have audio.
Yeah, it
Or we're gonna watch a video without audio.
should. Well,
Okay.
it should.
Is this the remote for?
That's the remote for the television, I think, turn that up. and
I'm
it'll
gonna,
go.
I'm gonna turn it up, we'll see what happens here. I don't know how loud I need to get it. Let's just see how it goes. If this doesn't work, we'll do something different tomorrow night. Or maybe it won't go. Is it going on that computer? Or is it?
I don't know.
Is it just this?
I don't know.
On
It's
that
showing
one.
the same thing. on
Same
there.
screen.
Hit the down arrow and see what happens. That went backwards. Okay, well, we have a little, issue we need to, I have, each one of my sessions ends with a video, so we gotta get this fixed, okay? And maybe we can get it fixed before the next session, because I really want you to see this, this little video. Okay, by my watch, my clock, wow, it's 6:40. So let's take no longer than 15 minutes to have refreshments or whatever. And if you want to ask a question to me or whatever during this, that's fine too. But let's take a break.
Those that might not know, there's a restroom down the hall for the ladies, the men back here in this room. And men, if you use this toilet, you gotta pass the handle pretty hard.
Get it, man, let's
So
go.
if it doesn't work, pass it hard, it'll work.
It's,
All right, let me see what's going on.
Well, you're a maintenance man, sir.
no.
All right, look at that.